News in on the real estate front, looking at realestate.com.au, Australia's largest real estate website. They're talking hot or not, where property markets are heating up and cooling down. The concept of being able to get into a property market just as it's about to boom is tantalising for many investors. Unfortunately, it's often cover for vendors selling overpriced property to people from out of town. But of course, it is important to look at where prices are moving and where stock's moving and what population's doing and what infrastructure's doing when you're choosing where to invest. But generally, today's hotspot is tomorrow's very cold spot, as we'll see very shortly. But let's give realestate.com the benefit of the doubt here. And so they've got a table, if we can scroll down to the table, looking at house prices. And if you look at some of the big numbers here, we're seeing big movements in Newcastle and Lake Macquarie in New South Wales. That's hardly surprising, but as the Sydney market gets more and more expensive, people are looking to move out. Newcastle has shown a significant level of gentrification over the last decade, probably. It was extraordinarily depressed when the steelworks closed and the coal mines were considered environmentally a bad thing. But it's got a lot of new stock, a lot of lifestyle activities happening. But it is a sign to be careful that large increase is in part due to the increased quality of the stock. And certainly looking at the newer properties, that doesn't surprise me. But $1 million as a median house value in Newcastle compared to a Sydney-wide average of 1.5 probably is an interesting move. You certainly wouldn't have picked that 10 years ago. Looking at some of the other big ones, we're seeing good big moves in Parramatta, probably a reflection of the work from home phenomenon and the increased infrastructure going into Parramatta. So that's becoming a much more attractive spot. Moving now to the Northern Territories, we see Darwin come in at an annual 6.1%. That's a big change from the last 5 or 6 years where Darwin's gone nowhere. It boomed in the 90s with a lot of military spend, the development of the Alistair-Darwin Railway, the port development, and it's really gone nowhere for quite some time. So that's a bit of a reversion to the mean happening there. And but Darwin is still a volatile market. It's cheap, and that makes it attractive. There's a lot of rental demand because of the transitory nature of much of the population, but highly volatile, not a place for first-time buyers in my book. Brisbane and the Gold Coast, big 6% plus numbers there. That's a lot of the migration from the southern capitals as property gets more expensive in the south. Definitely ones to watch. Big fan of Brisbane as a investment location, but you do have to be careful where. You need to be very careful of new house and land packages being sold by property spruikers, but plenty of demand in the inner east and inner west and south. Big fan. But I'll be avoiding the wider spread suburbs like Springfield. Melbourne, lots of negative signs there in Melbourne. And that's really a sign that over the last year, Melbourne struggled with government costs, and the quarter shows a bit of an upturn, and maybe we found the bottom there. Where else are we seeing around the city? Regional Victoria, Bendigo, a big beneficiary of the work from home trend and the huge spend on infrastructure by the Victorian government. And of course, Hobart. That's definitely boomed over the last few years. But, one of the stories around hotspotting is the hotspots soon become cold spots. So if you look at where housing is slowing, which is the flip side of the hotspot. So we're seeing places like Townsville, Bunbury, Sunshine Coast, Mackay. All of these would have been on anyone's hotspot list a year or two ago. And now we're seeing them turn around. So Mackay, good example there, 12-month change 9%, 3-month change down almost 2%. Townsville, 20% up for the year, 2.3% for the year. Townsville very dependent on government and military for the activity. So that's a big turnaround there. Bunbury in the southwest of Western Australia, beautiful spot. God's country down there, but it's now, I guess, pulling back from those big increases. And we'll see, and that will be dependent a lot on the success of the resources industry. That much of that is funded by people moving out of Perth or buying weekenders, and spend on tourism. So, and similarly, Sunshine Coast, we saw a lot of activity up there with big infrastructure spend around the hospital and roads, and now we're seeing that sort of pull back a bit. So the challenge is, today's hotspot is tomorrow's cold spot, but there definitely is a property clock, which you can see. So we generally see house prices move through a cycle from boom through stability to downturn to bottom. And it is a cycle. It can be hard to predict, and you need to be careful about betting on new infrastructure. Sort of by the time it's built, the improvement's already baked into the price. So to my mind, new investors will be best served by middle ring suburbs in East Coast capital cities for some time. So that was just a taster of what's happening on the hotspot market. Go to realestate.com.au and have a look at their full list. And of course, if you need property data, CoreLogic is one of the best places to get it. And their quarterly or monthly chart pack is the densest packed piece of relatively unbiased property market data you're ever going to find. Check it out.